Welcome to another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast, where we delve into the depths of parenting in ways that you might never have thought of before. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello, Avrohom Leffler LCSW. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, how you doing?
Valdik, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I couldn't be more excited, and thanks for having me. I'm very honored.
Okay, I want to tell you that there was someone, I don't think I ever told you this, there was someone that was trying to prove to me that there was somebody in the field of working with kids that he really knew what he was talking about. And he said, it was even this big therapist that was having a whole back and forth with him. I said, who's that? Avrohom Leffler, big therapist in Chemet. So we're honored to have you on today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Always appreciate the kind words.
I'm sure you're enjoying the weather, right? Beautiful weather we have here today.
As long as this interview takes place indoors, then totally fine with it. Outdoors is another story.
I just feel bad for all the people in LA and Florida. You know, we have over here beautiful 20-degree weather with ice and snow. I've been waiting for this for 2 years.
There's kids who don't know what snow is. You know what I mean? So, this is important.
Speaking of kids, tell me, you're a therapist and you see clients in Chemet, you see clients privately. For those who don't know, what else is a licensed clinical social worker, which is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's higher than like an MSW or, some of the other certifications that social workers have, right? You're a clinical social worker. That's a higher level. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Well, when we graduate, so it's an MSW, so it's like a master's of social work. And then once we take the clinical exam, which means you have to be in the field for a few years and have a bunch of years of clinical hours, supervision, then we take, of course, yet another exam and so on and so forth. And yeah, as far as I know, the highest form of licensure is the LCSW. I also happen to be a clinical supervisor as well. So I could provide actually supervision to other social workers who want to gain experience or get their hours or just in general learn more. But yeah, absolutely correct. The LCSW is the highest form of life.
Okay, so then it's an honor to have you on here. The fact that you
starting to feel good about myself. Thank you.
We'll talk about that soon. The fact that you can supervise other therapists, does that sometimes give you a feeling of like you're accomplishing much more than you would do with just one client? You're affecting his whole caseload. I mean, I went off on a tangent here. This was not part of what I planned, but I'm curious.
That's a great question. It's a great skill as an interviewer, like on the spot, going with it. I think that's great. And first of all, it's a really good question.
About myself also.
Great, terrific, successful, from both ends. Off to a good start. It's a great question. It's a great question. I never even thought about it in that way. That's a really good question. I think you're right. I actually think you're right because, one-on-one is it is only so much we can do one-on-one. I'd like to think if I help someone, they help, let's say if I'm working with parents, so it could benefit, the family and so on and so forth. And who knows, right? It's spread.
Right.
But you're right. By doing supervision, it really is another way to do that. As far as like people actually tell me that they've changed the way they do therapy or they use, let's say, more CBT or more evidence. Yeah, absolutely. They've changed their whole practice, so you're 100% right. I think that's a powerful point.
So you mentioned a point here, and that takes us right into what we want to talk about. Actually, just as a disclaimer, everybody should know that a lot of the way people do interviews or podcasts, they have like a list of questions that they are going to ask their interviewee, and they share it with them beforehand. We did not do that. I don't even really have a list of questions. I do have some topics I want to cover with Avrohom Leffler, but he doesn't really know anything. And that's hopefully what's going to make this a lot more fun. So getting right into it, you mentioned dealing with parents, you have more of an impact than, let's say, dealing with one child on their own. And I feel like that as well. I mean, I worked with kids in schools for close to 10 years now. but I feel like my work with parents, affects the whole family. And if I get to work with a parent who's a Rebbe or a teacher, then not only do I affect their family, but I affect their classroom and all their classrooms, every year from then on. So the more of an impact that we can have, the better off we feel about that. So let me ask you like this: what do you see mostly parents, mostly kids? Who do you, and when you see adults, are you seeing them, for their children? Are you seeing them for themselves? And really, the bigger question I think is when you actually work with kids, how much work do you put in with the parents as well?
Okay. So I'll answer first, and second. So yes, generally speaking, so I see them all, right? So my caseload is diversified, which I absolutely love. So I see both kids and adults. So totally independent things. So I see just, kids for their own things. I see adults for individual therapy. And I also do lots of parenting. So I guess
Yeah.
like you, right? So I think we share a passion for that work, right? Which is
Right.
great.
I don't see
So yeah, I
adults.
do
Yeah.
both. As far as, yeah, that's a great question. As far as seeing kids and what's the involvement with parents and encouraging that and what if not and when yes and when not, right? Because I find it's a big onion, right? Like it's a big balancing act. And I think there are kids who can come to therapy and just do okay, right? They just show up, it's everything's doing all right. That happens. The family's great. It does happen.
Mhm.
There's great parents out there, wonderful families.
Mhm.
The kid needs a little help. They need a little bit, in the right direction, whatever, anxiety, emotions. And
100%.
they're able to come, they're able to learn some stuff, put it into play, and they do great, right? It does
Right.
happen. And then the parent's role is, of course, besides for, of course, bringing them, which is, hey, it's a lot of work and effort. I really appreciate what parents do is, they come and they're dedicated, they're consistent. I always tell parents that
100%.
two of the biggest things for consistency of results is just show up on time, consistently, right? Have some
Mhm.
patience. It's not a session or two, and just be consistent. So I do appreciate that. But yeah, and some kids need a lot more. Some kids, of course, the family does play a more active role, helping them. It could be encouraging them, cheerleading them, making their own changes. So ultimately, looking at the family system. So we usually
Right.
are pretty curious about the family system and,
Involving families.
we try to keep it in mind. And why
Mhm.
not? Like you said, it's more powerful. It's just
Right.
the more powerful way
100%.
to do things, right? I think it's more powerful.
100%.
And I often tell parents, tell me what you think. I often tell
Mhm.
parents, I said, your kid is great, right? And they're really trying. But he's a kid, right? Like you're parents,
Mhm.
you're older, you're smarter, you have more ability, right? And you could do it in a
Mhm.
tenth of the sessions, right? So
Right.
sometimes I will encourage parents to come in, whether in conjunction or instead of the kid, because ultimately, they do have more ability, right? So absolutely.
Right.
It's a very positive way to say it, but I think it's true. I think it's factual.
Yes, 100%. It's very, very important to continuously let parents know as you're working with them, even as you're giving them tools and different things and ideas to do to better their parenting, to let them know that their kid is great, they're great. That's a very important point. Let me ask you about that point. Um, when parents don't hear that, when kids don't hear that, very often we can say, they're anxious. They have anxiety. I don't know. I'm not a licensed clinical social worker, but they're anxious. You could see that. You could see a kid eating his tzitzis, biting his fingernails, right? There's some other type of indications of anxiety. Sometimes you'll see it in appearance as well that they have anxiety. I'm imagining if you have a kid coming to you and that kid has anxiety, very often he will need his parents to be more involved than a child without anxiety. So I like this topic because in my work, it comes up a lot. Do you see anxiety a lot in your office?
So I do. I
You
definitely
do.
do.
Okay.
Um,
So let me ask you like this.
Anxiety is sure. I absolutely. It's a topic which, as you can
Yeah,
imagine, I have a lot what to say
we're gonna
about.
try
So
to we're
fire
gonna
away.
try to keep it a little specific over here because the clock is ticking. So let me ask you like this. Let's talk children, specifically younger children. I'm gonna talk, let's say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, let's say 4 years old to 10 years old. Okay, it's a younger
Mhm.
child, I believe, not a baby, but not an older child, a younger child. How often, would you see anxiety in them? And what would be the cause Obviously, every case is different, but what would you see as happening often as a cause for anxiety in younger children? And I don't want you to answer this now, but I do want you to know that I'm going to ask it to you next. You shouldn't answer it now. I want to know also what the difference is between a deep anxiety and a surface level anxiety. But let's start with the first thing we said. Do you have,
Okay, I'll
do
try
you
to
see
ignore
it
the last
often in that
question.
each child? I know. I'm whetting your appetite over here. You see it often in that age child, and what would be a typical cause?
So do I see it often? And I'm sorry, what was the last question?
What would be a typical cause for such a young child
Okay.
to have anxiety?
Okay. Okay. So yes, I see it often. I think anxiety is, fortunately very common, right? I think across,
Mm,
really all ages, it's very, very common. So so ultimately, what is anxiety and how does it manifest? Whether on like you said, it's hard to totally separate it from the next question. I'll try to, but
okay.
on a surface level,
Well,
on
I
a
make
deeper
life a little
level,
difficult for you, you know?
that's all right. It's all good. If I'm stumped, I'm stumped. That's fine. We can deal with it. But
Okay, good. I'm happy to hear
so
that.
absolutely, absolutely. No one knows it all, and always, trying to learn, open to learn more and more. Right?
Mhm.
That's the name
That's
of the
right.
game. That's the name of the game. Absolutely. I'm sure when we're both done with this, well, we're both, different people than when we walked in. Right?
I
Literally different
hope
people.
so. That's for sure.
Uh, fantastic. So yeah, so anxiety. So anxiety could be, I find it could either be general or specific, right? So what's the difference between the two? So a specific anxiety would be, of course, again, how if I it's that simple, right? Because a lot of times, I get calls all the time, right? Oh, could you see
Mhm.
this kid? Could you see this? Right? They have some anxiety, right? Most of
Mhm.
the time, that's not quite the case. It's a few different things, it's several different things, and so on and so forth. So a
Right.
specific anxiety would be let's say a kid who has anxiety about generalized anxiety, racing thoughts, what if this, what if that, fear of phobias, thunder, light, coming on time to school, homework, how do I do perfectionism? So it's,
Mhm.
all the goodies, all the more specific anxieties,
You
right?
see that type a lot of times in younger children?
So I do see that. It
And
definitely
what would
comes
be the
across. I get a
cause
lot of
of it?
clients for any form of anxiety. So I do get that. And for carrots, I try to keep it as specific as possible if it is,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it's something to focus on. And even if there are more, if there is more going on, once someone does well in therapy and they focus on one area, they gain some knowledge and skills, they feel better about themselves, right? And they
Yeah.
have more confidence, right? And they have more buy-in. And then you could
Okay.
move on if there's something else, which really brings on to point two is if it is more global. So what's another way to view anxiety? It's in general, just a feeling. How does a person feel about themselves, about the world? Throwing confidence, self-esteem, right? It gets deeper and
Mhm.
deeper, right? So,
Mhm.
that's a little bit more, maybe general as far as how does a person feel? If someone doesn't do well in life, let's say
Okay.
you
Let
might
me
see
break
this in
this down.
school. What was that?
Right. No, let me break this down a little bit. So really
Sure.
what I'd wanted to hear from you now was more like what's causing the anxiety. And of course you can't really answer that without saying what anxiety is, which is why you jumped to that,
Okay,
which is
no problem.
fine.
So
Which is fine. Totally,
causes
totally fine.
anxiety?
One
We
second.
could go that way. So what,
One
what,
second.
sure,
So that's great. So let me take it down from what you said. You said there were two different types of anxiety. There's a specific anxiety, which means an anxiety about something. Anxiety about something would be the examples you gave were thunder, lightning, going to school, different things like that. They're all about a specific thing or event. That would be a specific anxiety, which you said you try to keep as specific as possible. Then there would be a general anxiety, a person that's not necessarily nervous about a specific thing, but more he's not confident about himself, he's not comfortable with himself, and therefore he's more of a nervous person. You did mention another point also that once you start feeling better about yourself, but that's already talking about how to deal with it. We'll get to that soon. Right now, I think what you explained very clearly was that there's a big difference between these two types of anxieties. So now I'm going to ask you on each one specifically. Let's say a
sure.
phobia or an anxiety about a specific thing, going to school, lightning, thunder, whatever it might be. Is that something that a person's born with? A. B, is it something that comes from, let's say, a trauma or something? Or C, is he born with a predisposed condition which gets made worse by certain environmental factors? Mix it up. Go ahead.
So the real answer is, of course, is both, right? It's the famous concept of nurture nature, right?
Mhm,
So in other words, and it's true really with almost any mental health condition, disorder. It really is a combination of both. So in other words, what is nurture nature, right? So it's a combination of environment. So that could be
mhm,
home environment, the house that the kid grows up in. Do the parents have anxiety? Grandparents have anxiety, so on and so forth. And then there's nature, which is just the child's own nature, their own biological disposition. Some people are born with certain tendencies. They might be born with certain anxious tendencies, depressive tendencies. Some people are born
excellent.
maybe with a more positive, tendency, right?
Right.
So it's usually a combination of both. So I don't like.
So you're basically saying C, meaning a person that's, let's say, born naturally confident and flamboyant in a way, they're going at it, and nothing bothers them and they're all excited and whatever. So then even if their parents are more nervous or, or they once got put in a thunderstorm and it was, everybody around them was going crazy, they're more likely not to really suffer from anxiety, even due to the environmental things around them because their nature is not predisposed to that. On the other hand, someone whose nature is predisposed to that, is more, if their environment is a more of a positive and not anxious environment, then they have an easier time also coming out of that. You really need the combination of both the fact that the person, the child that they were talking about, is more predisposed to it, and also the environment lends itself in whatever way to the child actually feeling anxious. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. And again,
Okay.
and my
Now let
answer
me
to
ask you like
everything
this.
is usually C. It
Yeah,
usually is, but
that's true.
that
100%.
I
Yeah.
some a nice balance. Yeah. So there is aspects of both, and of course there's exceptions, right? The house could be the most calm, loving, everything, and a kid is
100%.
going to anyways have certain fears and anxieties. Even
Right.
then, the role of the environment can only help. If it's a good relationship with emotions, with anxiety, it could only help. But even with all of that, of course, the kid sometimes will still need therapy and, whatever interventions are needed, which is
Right.
totally fine.
So now let's get to the, to the $1,000,000 question. I guess let's stay on this specific anxiety because it's probably much more common. So, and let's talk about the difference between a deep anxiety and a surface level anxiety. This is a hot topic by me. Right now, I'm going to pretend like who said there is a difference. Maybe I just made that up. Okay. I made that up. If somebody has anxiety, they have anxiety. They're anxious, they have anxiety. So, yeah, somebody could have more anxiety or less anxiety. But if they're anxious, they have anxiety, they need help for the anxiety. You tell me, is there a difference or is there no difference?
So it's a great question, probably a very multi-layered and complex question, which we go on for days on it. Oh,
Let's see if you can do it in a minute or two.
oh, 30 seconds, I don't know what you'll do with the extra thought. But I'll try to keep it short. Please interrupt me if it's too long. So
So,
yeah, again, so anxiety is complex, right? So in other words, everyone's different, right? Everyone's different.
mhm,
Everyone has a different relationship with anxiety. So what I would say is absolutely. If someone's doing pretty well, they're confident, they do okay in life, and they happen to have, one specific phobia or one specific anxiety, if we can deal with that, I think that's always the best and the easiest. And then we take it from there. If someone has, let's just say, nothing specific, but they come into the office and say, I'm just anxious, right? I'm just like, I'm always anxious. I always feel anxious, so on and so.
mhm,
Even then, I'm going to work with the person to say, great, of course, I'll validate that, but we'll still try
mhm,
to break it down and teach them about anxiety and how do you know you're anxious? Do you feel it in your body? Do you have any anxious thoughts? Whether it's relaxation techniques, whether it's changing thoughts, whether it's deeper as far as their core belief about themselves, right? Which is the more maybe global, way to look at it. But
mhm.
yeah, but again, there is a concept of unexplained anxiety. In other words, there's not always a reason for things. Sometimes, like that's more DBT perspective as far as, you know, how I would use that as far as, opposite emotion and stuff like that. But yeah, sometimes there's no reason for it. I just feel anxious, right? So absolutely. So then, but bottom line is we still work with, okay, but what can you do about it? Right.
Yeah,
So,
100%. I know you. You're very focused on actually helping the person, not just. That's why we like each other. Go on.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah. So, I view it as far as, with anxiety is to try to keep it focused, to try to help the person, to teach the person versus what's the alternative? Me getting overwhelmed with them as well,
Right,
right? Oh my gosh,
right,
that we can't deal with that, right? That sounds like it's too
right.
much. So we always try to have like, let's try to help the person, let's try to be effective and so on and so forth. I know you mentioned trauma before, right? As far as if you're alluding that that's another way for a person to feel anxious or not great or unsteady or not a great relationship with their emotions, or right, or
Mhm.
for sure. So if someone experienced trauma, again, let's say an adult for a minute, it might come up
Okay.
also. If someone experienced trauma or complex trauma or had a really difficult environment, absolutely,
Right.
that we will pay attention to that. But a lot of times I will start with that, to helping them first deal with their
So, so,
emotions on
so let
some
me ask you
level,
like,
emotion regulation, stuff like that.
right. So let me ask you like this. Basically, when I asked you what, the difference between a deep anxiety and a surface level, what you basically said was that when someone has a general anxiety, right, not necessarily a specific one, then it's tends to be more surface level. If someone has a deep trauma, that tends to be a deeper anxiety or, trauma, however you want to term that. Either way, we're going to try to help them, but obviously it would be different. So let's go straight to, I think what comes up very often in children is a specific anxiety without a deep trauma. For example, I'm going to tell you an example of one of my clients that I actually was working with the boy and the parents for this one. And the mother calls me up and says, my child is not cannot be on the floor himself. Meaning if we're upstairs, he needs to be upstairs with us. We're downstairs, he needs to be downstairs with us. It's crazy. I mean, what can we do about this? How, what are we gonna do? Now, my view on that, so my view on that is it's not a problem. That's fine. It's very normal for a child of 5, 6, 7 years old to go through these different types of anxieties, of different specific anxieties, as you term them. A child has a fear of getting wet, of it being in the rain, being caught in the rain. And they go crazy. It might rain. It's going to rain in 3 weeks. I have to go inside right now. That right. And the parent, understandably, it's hard for them. But at the same time, it's very normal. And that's something you just want to ride through. You don't really want to make it into a whole problem that needs fixing when it's not really a problem. So these kind of specific things I would look at as more surface level and and not even necessarily needing a major intervention, but rather we would guide the parent in how to not add to that anxiety, but rather how to, be calm about it, let the child ride it out. That doesn't mean the mother needs to go running up and down with the kid every time the kid needs it. She could say, I know that's scary for you to go upstairs. Right now, mommy can't go up. At the same time, she's understanding that this is normal and it's not an issue for a 5, 6, 7 year old to feel like that. And he will, eventually grow out of it. Obviously, if he doesn't, then you call Avrohom Leffler. Now, I think I just ruffled your feathers a little bit over here, and I'm ready for you to go at it.
It makes for better drama, right? It's a better episode if there's some fireworks, right?
That's it.
So
Let's go for the
no, you're gonna have to do
fireworks.
better than that if you want to have it out. You're gonna have to do better than that.
Wow.
No,
We'll try
I
in the
think I
next
think
one. Now let's see what you have to say on this.
I think no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. So in other words, it's only a problem if it is, right? Not everything's a
Mhm.
problem. And again, you're also alluding to, I think, the parents' role in all of that, right? Like, parents, are they overreacting? Are they making it more right? So for sure. But ultimately, the way I usually phrase it is it affecting, is it impacting functioning or not? Right? That's usually
Beautiful.
sort of
Yeah.
like the agenda that we use. So yeah, kids could be nervous. Everyone has their own things, right? A little bit fear, a little bit would rather a parent be upstairs, downstairs. Some accommodation, not validation, right? Absolutely. The only problem is if it's affecting functioning, which means maybe they're getting a little bit older, which means it's getting extreme, which means, right, it's affecting their life. It's becoming, pretty strong. It's intense, right? So then
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, okay, it's
Avram,
not cute
Avram, now I
anymore.
have a problem. Now I have a problem because you agreed with me, and and I'm even agreeing with what you're saying that if it affects the functioning, you have 11, 12-year-old kid that won't go on the floor themselves. That that could be a problem, and that should get some sort of intervention. And if we're agreeing with each other, then I can't make the fireworks. What are we going to do now?
I can't help you with that, I can't help you with that. But again, I think it's an important point just to highlight it. But think about it.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a kid who is somewhat anxious, right?
Mm,
Separation anxiety, whatever, call it what you want,
mm,
right? And it could go either way. So the parent could rush the kid to the therapist for 3 years, right? Like
mhm.
you have a problem, you have to work on it, right? Oh, okay. Or if the parent stays calm and helps them through it, again, also viewing a kid's anxiety, means they have a situation which is hard for them. They don't feel
Right.
safe. It's hard, right? Whatever the case is. So the parent is helping them get through it sometimes, right? You're like,
100%.
oh, okay, sure. I'll stay with you for a few minutes. Or if that helps the kid get over it and feel safer, so to speak, right? And
Right.
have more confidence and skill level in dealing with that, it could be it will go away by itself, right? So
Right.
absolutely. I think that could even be the ideal if that's the case, right? I think that's
This
absolutely
I fully agree with. I very often we try to counsel the parents. Again, like you said before, there's many, many factors and layers. But essentially, when we work with parents and we are able to guide the parents and how to feel confident that they shouldn't feel anxious and they should, have a handle on what they're doing, very often the child's anxiety level automatically goes down. And then specific when there is that anxiety, if the parents are able to know that this is not a major problem and they have the correct tools to deal with them, that in itself could be, like you said, the most ideal way for the child to grow. That being said, it's not that the parents are to blame for the child's problem. It's that with the correct tools, the parents are able to help their child grow. Because, like we said before, the children that are like this are because they're predisposed to it, and then the environment plays a role on a child with that predisposition. So the way I look at it is that the child is predisposed to it, and then the parents, without having the correct tools, are not able to help them veer away from that mindset. But if they have the correct tools, then they're able to help them, even a child that's predisposed, let's say, towards anxiety, which we're talking about today, is able to help their child grow even with this predisposition. What do you feel about
absolutely,
that?
absolutely, absolutely. So, we could literally call this episode even not in calm, empowered, right, confident parenting, right?
Okay, I'm going to
If
need you to
parents are
text
able to
that
do
to
that, it
me.
will help with the anxiety.
So I'm going to need you to text that to me so I could put it in the title, okay?
Sure.
Eh, Okay, thank you, Avram Leffler, and everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And today we spoke about what did we speak about? What were the words you just said? Okay,
Calm, confident, empowered parenting, which helps alleviate anxiety. I
okay.
don't
So
make it
today
too
we
much.
spoke about calm, confident, empowered parenting, which can help alleviate anxiety. Together with our guest Avram Leffler LCSW, and I hope that every single one of you has gained from today's episode. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast. I truly hope that this episode has been beneficial for you in your parenting. Please let me know either in the comments or by sending me an email at Baruch, that's BORUCH, at bmaparenting.com. Have a wonderful day.